I still remember the sound of boots echoing through the cold hall before they even opened the cell door. We were a group of Japanese prisoners, exhausted, starving, and uncertain of what tomorrow would bring. The nights were long, and whispers of punishment spread to the camp like a slow-moving fog. None of U.S. could escape. That morning, the guards didn't speak like they usually did. They seemed colder, more focused. One of them slammed his baton against the metal bars and barked a single order in a tone that froze my blood. Everyone outside. Now! We barely had time to put on our worn boots before we were dragged into the open square of the camp. The ground was damp, the wind sharp against our skin. We stood in a line, trembling, not from the cold, but from the unknown. Then came the command that made every single one of us stop breathing for a moment. Strip. A silence so heavy fell over us that even the wind seemed afraid to move. Our hearts pounded. For a second, we didn't believe it. But the guards repeated it, louder, more aggressive. Take off your clothes. Some hesitated. Others obeyed immediately, afraid of what would happen if they didn't. I felt shame burn through me as I undressed piece by piece, surrounded by my comrades who were just as terrified and exposed. We stood there, bare, vulnerable, humiliated, but it wasn't just about taking our clothes. The guards' eyes looked different, like they already knew what came next. And that's when fear turned into full-blown dread. Something far worse than humiliation was about to begin, and none of us were prepared for it. The cold air bit into our skin like needles. Every breath felt heavier, more shallow. The guards circled us slowly, their boots crunching against gravel with a rhythm that made our nerves tighten with each step. None of us dared to speak. One of the taller guards, a man with emotionless eyes, raised his hand, signaling for silence even though none of us had uttered a word. He scanned our faces, searching not for weakness, we all had that, but for something deeper, resistance. Then he pointed at one of us, Tanaka, a young soldier barely in his 20s. You, the guard said, voice flat, stepped forward. Tanaka froze, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. I could see the war inside him, pride against fear. He took one step forward. The guard stared at him for a few seconds, then reached into his belt and tossed something at his feet. A metal bucket. No explanation. No instructions. Just a bucket. We didn't know what it meant. Tanaka hesitated, his eyes shifting between us and the guard. The silence stretched on like a rope slowly tightening around his neck. Then another guard approached him and tapped the bucket with the end of his baton. It was a warning, a message. Obey or suffer. Tanaka slowly picked up the bucket with trembling hands. The tall guard then turned to the rest of us and spoke with chilling clarity. You will follow every order given today, he said. How you respond will decide your fate here. Not a single person moved or even dared to breathe loudly. At that moment, we all understood something terrifying. We weren't just being punished. We were being tested. And this test was only the beginning. Tanaka held the bucket tightly, his breathing shallow, his eyes fixed on the ground as if afraid to even look up. The guards weren't rushing. They didn't shout. They didn't strike anyone yet. They simply watched us like hunters studying trapped animals before choosing which one to break first. One of the guards finally walked over to a water barrel near the edge of the yard and dipped a ladle into the freezing liquid. The water glistened under the weak morning sun. He poured it into Tanaka's bucket, slowly, deliberately, until it was filled nearly to the brim. Hold it, he ordered. Tanaka lifted the bucket with both hands, muscles tensing immediately under the weight. The cold metal stung his fingers. I could see them already turning pale from the chill. Then the guard turned to us. You will stand here until told otherwise, he said. No moving, no speaking. And if anyone drops what they're given, his pause was long enough to make our stomachs twist. Everyone will pay. We were no longer just stripped of clothing. We were stripped of control. Minutes passed. Then more. The wind grew harsher, cutting into our skin like blades. Tanaka's arms began trembling. I could see the panic rising in his eyes. His breast became shaky, his shoulders unsteady. But he didn't want to be the one who made us suffer. The guards watched with unsettling calmness. Then one of them casually pulled out a stopwatch. They were timing him. Tanaka's arms were shaking violently now. His knees bent slightly as he tried to shift weight, without moving too much. The bucket wobbled. "No," he whispered under his breath. "But the body has limits." A sudden tremor went through his arms, and the bucket tipped. Freezing water spilled over his legs and splashed onto the ground. The guards didn't react with anger. They reacted with smiles. Slow, disturbing smiles. They had been waiting for someone to fail. And now, the real punishment could begin. The moment the water hit the ground, the entire camp yard felt different, colder, heavier, as if even the sky sensed what was coming. The guard with a stopwatch clicked it shut with a soft snap that echoed louder than any shout. He stepped forward, right into the spilled water, and looked at Tanaka, who stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes full of fear and apology. But the guard didn't speak to him. Instead, he turned toward all of us. Line forward, he commanded flatly. We didn't understand at first, until two other guards marched toward us, batons in hand. Faces stern and unreadable. "Every one of you," the lead guard continued, "will feel the price of failure." A cold silence spread across the yard. Tanaka's lips moved, forming the words, "I'm sorry," but no sound came out. One by one, they made a step forward. Each prisoner was forced to stand with arms fully extended, palms up. If anyone let their arms drop, everyone would start over. But it wasn't just that. Within moments, the guards brought out large stones and placed one in each prisoner's hand. The rocks were rough, heavy, and freezing cold, just like the water that had soaked Tanaka's legs. My palms burned from the cold contact, as if I had pressed them against ice. "Hold," the guard ordered. "You drop it." We repeat this. All day if needed. A ripple of fear ran through the line. The yard was silent, except for the sound of our breathing growing ragged and the distant call of crow overhead, as if it had come to witness our suffering. Minutes crawled by like hours. My shoulders ached almost immediately, and I could feel my wrists beginning to tremble. Tanaka stood among us now, his arms raised like ours, forced to share the punishment he'd triggered. His jaw was clenched, his eyes filled with guilt he couldn't escape. The guards moved along the line slowly, watching every twitch. They weren't just testing our strength. They were testing our unity. Breaking one of us wasn't enough. They wanted to break all of us. The stones grew heavier by the minute, not because their weight changed, but because our strength slowly drained away with every passing second. My shoulders felt like they were on fire, and sharp pain spread down my arms as my muscles screamed for relief. Beside me, Ito's knees buckled for a moment, but he forced himself upright again, teeth gritted so hard I feared they might crack. Every prisoner fought the same silent war, against the pain, against collapse, against shame. A guard slowly walked in front of us, hands behind his back, eyes scanning our trembling arms. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. His calm presence was worse than anger. It felt like a countdown to suffering. A few places down the line, Nakamura could barely hold on. He was older than most of us, a man who had joined the war late, driven more by duty than strength. His arms shook violently, and tears slipped down his face, not from emotion, but from raw, physical agony. The guard stopped in front of him. Nakamura tried to steady his grip, but his hands betrayed him. The stone slid. He gasped, trying to catch it, but it slipped from his numb fingers and crashed onto the ground. For a moment, nobody moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The guard crouched, picked up the stone, and brushed off the dirt. Then he placed it back into Nakamura's trembling hands. "Again," he said quietly. Then he raised his voice so all could hear. "We start over." A collective wave of despair rippled through the line. Some prisoners shut their eyes, as if bracing for impact. Others silently cursed under their breath. I felt something inside me crack, not physically, but emotionally. Hope was slipping like the stone from Nakamura's hands. The guards didn't shout. They didn't beat anyone yet. But their punishment was far more cruel. Endurance without end. Shame without escape. Suffering together. As the stones were lifted once more into the cold air, we understood one brutal truth. They weren't just punishing us. They were reshaping us. One failure at a time. Our arms were lifted again, but this time something felt different. The pain didn't just burn, it numbed. My shoulders tingled with a strange mix of agony and coldness, as if my body couldn't decide whether to scream or shut down entirely. Breathing became harder. The stones felt as if they doubled in weight within minutes. Even the strongest among us were trembling now. I risked a glance down the line. Matsuda, who had always been the most defiant among us, had his jaw locked tight, veins bulging in his neck. But even he was on the edge of collapse. Tanaka stood silently, face tense, guilt still carved into every feature. He had stopped blinking, as though even that motion would cost him too much energy. The guards continued their silent patrol, observing, waiting. Finally it happened. Matsuda's arm gave out, not slowly, but all at once. His right arm snapped downward as his grip failed, and the stone crashed on the ground with a heavy thud. He didn't catch it. He didn't even try. He simply fell to his knees, gasping, forehead nearly touching the dirt. The yard fell dead silent. Matsuda didn't look like a defiant soldier anymore. He looked broken. The lead guard approached him slowly, his boots crunching with a calm, measured rhythm. He didn't yell. He didn't strike him immediately. He simply looked down at Matsuda kneeling in the dirt, shaking uncontrollably. Then came the order. On your feet. Matsuda tried, but his body refused. Stand up, the guard repeated, voice low. Matsuda's legs wobbled, but he couldn't make it. That's when the baton cracked across his back. One hit, not meant to injure severely, but to humiliate, to mark him, to send a warning through all of us like electricity. Matsuda bit back a cry, forcing himself upright, with effort so painful that every muscle in his face was strained. The guard placed a stone back into his hands. Again, he said, and we lifted our arms once more. Broken flesh, exhausted minds, and a fear growing inside us all, that one by one, every single one of us would fall. As our arms lifted again with agonizing slowness, the air around us felt heavier, not just in the cold or fatigue, but from something darker growing between us. Fear had bound us together in silence, but exhaustion had begun to unravel that unity. I could hear shallow breathing, quiet mutters, some praying, others cursing. A few steps down, I noticed Akamoto, a once disciplined officer, whispering desperately through clenched teeth. I can't hold it. I can't. Beside him, Ito glanced at him with a wild, panicked expression. His whisper cracked like fragile glass. If one more drops it, they'll make a start again. Nakamura, still shaking after his earlier failure, muttered something barely audible. It sounded like an apology that never ended. And then, quietly, someone said what many were already thinking. This will never stop unless someone ends it. The words hung in the air like a blade, not shouted, not confessed, but spoken just loud enough to reach a few ears, and spread like a tremor. A flicker of something dangerous passed through the line. Not courage, not yet, but the raw beginning of desperation turning into defiance. Tanaka, still tormented by guilt, breathed, "If I fail again, they'll break everyone. I'd rather they take me alone." But Matsuda, sweat and blood dripping down his face after baton strike, whispered with trembling breath, "They won't stop with one. They want to crush us all." That's when Ito said something I didn't expect. "They want to see if we'll turn on each other." His eyes stared straight ahead, stone in hand, pain everywhere in his body, but his voice carried a chilling truth. "They want us to blame, to hate, to break from within." A long silence followed. For a brief moment, no one dropped anything. Not because we were strong, but because now we knew the enemy wasn't just the guards. It was our breaking point, and they were watching to see who would shatter first. Seconds turned into minutes. Minutes began to feel like hours. It wasn't just physical pain anymore. It was psychological torture. The guards had created a battlefield without guns, where the enemy was our own endurance. I could feel my pulse pounding in my neck. My vision blurred for brief moments, the world fading in and out like a flickering lantern. The stone in my palms felt like it was burning through my skin, though I knew it was cold. Beside me, Tanaka's breathing became erratic. He swayed slightly, catching himself each time he nearly lost balance. His lips were moving silently, as though reciting an apology over and over to people who couldn't hear him, or wouldn't forgive him if they could. Further down, Nakamura's eyelids fluttered heavily. He was drifting, mentally trying to escape the pain by shutting down. Then came the moment we all feared. Nakamura's head tilted back slightly, eyes half open but no longer focused. His arms were still up, but they shook like leaves in a storm. His body leaned too far forward, and he collapsed face first to the ground, the stone slipping from his hands. It hit the dirt softly. His body hit harder. A collective gasp rippled through us, followed by an eerie quiet. For a second, I thought he might be dead, but his fingers twitched. He was alive, but barely conscious. The guards approached slowly, not out of concern, but expectation. One knelt beside Nakamura, checked his pulse, nodded once, and stepped back. The lead guard looked at all of us and spoke not with anger, but with something far more unsettling, cold amusement. "One down," he said. "Who's next?" No shouting, no threats, just a casual acknowledgement that Nakamura was only the first crack in the line. 2 guards dragged Nakamura's limp body away like a broken object. The rest of us were left standing, more terrified now than ever, because we had just witnessed the truth. We could collapse without warning, and when we did, we wouldn't be saved. We would simply be removed. Nakamura's body left a faint trail in the dirt as the guards dragged him away, his arms limp, his head hanging. None of us knew where they were taking him. Was he being treated? Punished? Left to die somewhere out of sight? Not knowing was worse than anything we could imagine. We were still standing there, naked, freezing, exhausted, each heartbeat echoing the same terrifying thought. What happens when I fall? The lead guard paced slowly in front of us, hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. At one point, he paused and looked at the remaining line, not with anger, but calculation. We weren't people to them. We were numbers, and numbers could be reduced. Beside me, Tanaka whispered hoarsely, "What if they don't bring him back?" Ito, whose voice had been steady before, now sounded hollow. "If he dies, do they even care?" Matsuda forced a bitter laugh through clenched teeth. "Care? They want this. They're measuring us, seeing who lasts, who breaks, who turns on the others." The guard stopped near us. His gaze fell on Tanaka for a moment, and Tanaka's face turned white. The guard didn't speak. He didn't need to. That silent stare alone carried an unspoken threat. "You're next." Seconds later, he moved on, but the psychological damage was done. Tanaka's breathing quickened. His arms trembled harder. His mind was unraveling faster than his body. I realized then that this wasn't a test of strength. It was a war of patience versus fear. And fear was winning. More and more, I heard quiet sobs mixed with strained breathing. The guards remained calm. They were waiting for another stone to fall. Not just from someone's hand, but from someone's spirit. Because once the fear of collapse became stronger than the will to endure, we wouldn't need to be beaten. We would break ourselves. That Tanaka's breathing became sharp and erratic, his chest rising and falling like he was drowning in air. His eyes darted anxiously, not at the guards this time, but at us. Every collapse before had been accidental. Nakamura's body gave out. Matsuda's strength failed. But this was different. Tanaka's fear wasn't about pain now. It was about the weight of guilt and the belief that he was the cause of everything. I can't do this to all of you again," he whispered through chattering teeth. Ito turned to him, voice desperate. "Stay together. Don't." But Tanaka was already shaking his head. His arms lowered slightly and came back up in a shaky attempt to resist. I could see the decision in his eyes long before it happened. He broke. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice cracking like glass. "I'm sorry for everything." And then he dropped the stone. It hit the ground with a loud thud, a sound far heavier than its actual weight, a sound that made every prisoner's stomach drop. For a second, no one moved, not even the guards. Tanaka sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face, not from pain, but from surrender. He didn't wait for the guards to drag him away. He crawled forward on his own, as if accepting whatever punishment awaited. The lead guard stepped toward him quietly. Instead of beating him, he simply placed a hand on Tanaka's head, like one might do to an animal that had finally submitted. Then he turned toward the rest of us. "Drop them," he commanded. We didn't hesitate. Every stone fell at once, crashing into the dirt like a thunderclap of defeat. Our arms fell limp to our sides. We didn't feel relief. We felt emptiness. We weren't applauded for obedience. We weren't scolded for failure. We were simply dismissed, like broken tools no longer needed, at least for now. As we were ordered to dress and return to our barracks, I glanced back and saw Tanaka being escorted somewhere else, calmly, almost gently. None of us knew where he was going. None of us asked, because in that moment, one truth became painfully clear. They never needed to beat us into obedience. They only needed to make us break ourselves. And they succeeded. That night, the barracks were quieter than ever, not because we were tired, though our bodies throbbed with pain, but because something inside us had changed. The guards had taken nothing from us physically that we didn't already lose, but mentally, they had achieved exactly what they wanted. They had proven they could break our pride with no whips, no blades, only time, fear, and each other's suffering. Nobody spoke about Nakamura. Nobody asked where the Naka was taken. Nobody talked about the stones, because to talk about it was to feel it again. I lay on the hard wooden bunk, staring at the dark ceiling. Every muscle in my arm still burned. My hands felt phantom weight, still clenched around the stone that was no longer there. Around me, men lay still, not sleeping but frozen in their thoughts. In the far corner, Matsuda sat upright, staring at his treasure. He looked like he wasn't sure whether to clench them in anger or hide them in shame. Ito finally whispered into the darkness, voice fragile, "Do you think Tanaka will come back?" No one answered, because hope was dangerous now. After a long pause, Matsuda spoke in a voice I barely recognized, quiet, broken, but not completely defeated. "If he does, we cannot let today define us." It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a statement of survival. We didn't reply, but in that silence, something faint sparked again. Not strength, not courage, but a shared understanding. They had broken us individually, but if we stayed silent forever, they would own our minds, not just our bodies. None of us were ready to fight back yet, but we were no longer going to break for them so easily. Not again. As I closed my eyes, a final thought settled deep within me. They forced us to strip our clothes. But the most dangerous thing they almost stripped away was our humanity, and that we had to protect now more than ever.